Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Our next speaker is Stefanie Molin. Stefanie is a software engineer. Hello. Stefanie is a software engineer in Bloomberg in New York City, and where she tackles tough problems in information security, particularly those revolving around data wrangling and visualization. And without further ado, Stefanie, please take it away.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. So as was mentioned, I'm Stefanie Molin, and I'm going to be sharing with you how you can get started with open source contributions. So we covered a little bit about me, but I want to highlight the fact that I'm a core developer of a tool called NumPyDoc, and the story about how that came to be is actually going to be interleaved throughout what I'm going to be sharing you today. So you'll see how you can make the steps from making your first contribution all the way to becoming a maintainer of a project. So I want to start by dispelling some myths around open source contributions. So the first one is that only professional developers or maintainers can contribute to open source projects. And just like you don't have to be a professional developer or a maintainer to use a project, you don't need to be one to contribute. And in fact, there are certain parts of certain contributions where being newer to a tool or not being an expert are actually the benefit. The second myth is that only experts can contribute something meaningful. So I kind of hinted to that before, right? Just because you don't have to be an expert to use it, you also don't have to be an expert to contribute something meaningful. Think about the case of documentation for onboarding new users. Someone who's an expert in the tool will be able to give really good documentation on the nitty-gritty stuff, but they might struggle to give documentation on a newcomer because they've been using the tool for 10 years. You as a newcomer will have a lot more context for that. So now that we understand that everyone in this room can contribute to open source, let's dive into how you actually make this happen. So in my opinion, the hardest part is actually finding something to work on in the first place. And this is especially the case if you limit yourself to only thinking about code contributions. There are a lot of ways that aren't strictly writing code that you can make a big impact on a project. Think volunteering. You could help translate documentation, make tutorials, build a community around a project, help reporting and triaging bugs. So just think about, in general, what are some projects that you have interacted with, that you've had some experience? And this is where I like to start. So you want to contribute. You're not going to just try to just look up random projects. You want to think about what are projects that you've used in the past or that you have some experience with, not that you've heard about and you've never used before. And I like to think of this as like word association game. Like the first thing that pops to your mind, you write it down. And later on, we'll look at this list and we'll evaluate those projects for suitability. So you'll give yourself some time to think about this. And when you have those written down, then you can start evaluating which ones to look further into. And I like to look at 5 things just to quickly evaluate these projects. So the first is the software license, so what it's distributed under. And this is because you might have restrictions from your employer that limit the types of projects that you can contribute to. So this is a quick way to see yes or no if you should be investing further time into researching if that project's going to be a match for you. The next thing is recent activity, right? You might be using something, but it may have actually been replaced by a newer tool. You don't want to be wasting your time and trying to get something merged in when people have moved on from that project. And also, you got to keep in mind that if something is very, very active, then you're probably going to need to be more on top of things too. So it's kind of a continuum, and you need to figure out what fits best for you. The next is the size of the code base. This is also a continuum, right? So if you have something that is a very large code base, there's probably more things that you could work on. But on the flip side, there's more things that you might need to understand to make those contributions. Versus something that's a smaller code base might be because it's new and there's a lot to work on, or smaller just because it's just a smaller functionality and there doesn't need to be much work. So you'll have to make that judgment call. The next thing to consider is the tech stack. So it's possible that, for example, you want to contribute to the library Seaborn, which is a visualization library. But you've only used it and you never really looked at the code, but you happen to be very familiar with matplotlib. That is what Seaborn's built on top of. So you're already in a very good position to contribute to Seaborn because you know the underlying library it's built on. So just doing some quick research into what are their dependencies and what they're using gives you an idea of how easily you're going to be able to onboard yourself into making contributions. And the final thing is repository access, right? So if you can't find the code publicly, then it's going to be very hard for you to contribute to that. And it doesn't have to be on GitHub, so keep that in mind. It might be hosted GitLab, Bitbucket, and you should be able to find that, for example. PyPI hopefully will have the information that you need right there. So hopefully at this point, you've whittled down that list of the projects to a few that you can then look further into, right? And now is when I'm going to introduce the 5 strategies that I've used to get started with different open source projects contributing to those. The first one is to participate in sprints. And you're lucky that this event does have sprints on Monday. So I would encourage you to go to that, especially if you've never been to a sprint before. And I'm going to share the story of my first sprint. So I participated in my first sprint at EuroPython in July of 2022. And that's me. And these two are core developers of scikit-learn. So in this project, in this sprint, they came with the task that they wanted us, the people in the group here, to work on helping make sure that all of their doc strings were NumPy doc compliant. And so that meant that they had come to the session with a prepared script where we could run tests on what we were changing to make sure that our doc strings that we were editing were matching the NumPy doc standard. And we also had this large issue detailing what we needed to change, and then other resources of past PRs that had been approved that we could consult. And obviously, we could ask questions to those maintainers, which is the big benefit of doing the sprint. And so I ended up contributing a few things, and then all of a sudden I had a problem. So I had already had some PRs merged, and now it wasn't working. The test script that they had given me was now telling me that the doc string needed to end, or part of the doc string needed to end in a period, and it's telling me it wasn't. Visually, it looked like it was. I called one of the maintainers over, looked at it. We both couldn't tell what was going on, because to us as humans, it looked like it ended at a period. I think you know where I'm going with this. So couldn't figure it out. I just deleted the whole thing, did it again. It worked this time. And then I asked, because I had the maintainers right in front of me, how do you not have this happen to you? What do you do to prevent this from happening? And that's when I learned about a tool called pre-commit. So there's like, oh, just pre-commit install. We have this set up, and it will remove that for you. And that was a big aha moment. So when I went home, I learned all about pre-commit. And I was like, first of all, why have I not heard this before? And also, why aren't other projects using that? And I found several instances of open source projects that wanted to set up pre-commit, but didn't know how to do it. Right? So that opened the door to other contributions. So in short, I had a fantastic experience at this, and I highly recommend if you have the chance to do one of these sprints that you take advantage of that. It's a great opportunity to learn from maintainers. So if you do end up going to the sprints, it's important that you pick a project that interests you. This is going to be a little tricky because you're not able to pick from any project on Earth, right? You have to pick from the ones that are being represented at the sprint. So try to pick the one that's most interesting, that most matches with what you're looking to do. And this is just to help motivate you to actually go through the process and not just leave before you're done, and potentially continue after the sprint. You can also look for beginner-friendly projects. This doesn't mean that the code is very simple. This might mean that the maintainers say that they're able to support people who are new to Git, or new to GitHub, or don't know how to make a branch, right? Or it might be that people who are new to the particular project. So usually they will state something like that, and that will help you decide where is best to spend your time. And use that resource. Use the fact that you have the maintainers in front of you, that there's no time delay in you responding, and then in a week, maybe they can look at your pull request, right? They're actually sitting in front of you, and you very quickly can iterate on what you're doing and get feedback. And always go into these with an open mind. You can learn lots of things. How do they manage a large code base? How do they navigate it? What kind of tools do they use? What plugins do they like in their IDE? And you can share things as well. Use this as a chance to interact with people outside of your work and learn how things are done in different spots. And that's all information that you can then share with other projects and also share in your circles. So now moving on to the second strategy, which is to contribute examples to documentation. So I'm sure everyone in this room has looked at a project's documentation at one point and not been able to figure out how to use it, right? It may have been that there were no examples. It may have been that the examples just weren't answering the questions that you had. And here's an example of a contribution I made to address exactly that. So I had been using NumPy's polynomial functionality, and then they came out with a new API, and they suggested migrating over to it. Except I didn't actually know how they wanted me to declare the things I needed to pass in. How did I actually create the polynomial? I couldn't find anywhere that documentation. So I had to open a Python REPL and just try a bunch of things out myself to see, okay, I'm guessing it's this. If I do this, is this correct? And as I went through those, I formulated what I needed to do to use it. But I didn't just throw away that information, right? Because that's something that I'm sure I wasn't the only one that had the question. So there were no examples at all beforehand, and so I had this thing written, and so I made a PR to NumPy and provided the examples that I had. Obviously, we iterated on it a little bit, but now the next person that has this question now has examples that they can consult. So every project needs good documentation. There's no secret. If you want people to be able to discover and use what you have, there needs to be documentation that makes it easy to onboard them. But unfortunately, it takes a lot of time to write that. And in the interest of moving the project forward at a faster speed, that might be the first thing that gets cut. But this is actually a very good example for you. So if you're looking to contribute, and you can also do this with certain parts of NumPy, where they might be a spot that doesn't have any documentation, and or any examples, and they'll have this usually in an issue. And you can just decide one day, I want to learn more about this particular module. So pick one of those, play around with the functionality. What does this do? What does that do? Come up with examples, and then you can contribute that back. So now you've learned more about that particular library, and also the next person that needs that now has an example that they can go off of. And you, as someone who's not the expert on that particular functionality, will have that insight of the newcomer, who someone's just trying to figure out how to use this. Are they going to understand? So that will help people. Moving on to the third strategy, this is to browse open issues for ideas. So here I have a screenshot of scikit-learn's GitHub, in particular their issues. If you look up here, there's 1,600 issues. So I'm not saying to read 1,600 issues, right? You're not going to ever be able to go through all of that. So I want to share some strategies about how you can whittle this down to a more reasonable number, and then what to actually do with the results. So first thing is that you have this labels over here. So right now there's 100 labels. That's much, much smaller than 1,600. And that's also something you can quickly scan, because you can search for the description or the name, and you can figure out. There's no standard that every repo has to use good first issue. It comes with the repo by default, but they can easily get rid of it. So you need to see what kind of tags or labels would make sense. This one, they do have good first issue. And just by selecting that, there's actually only 3 results, right? So this is already a much easier way to look through this. And then once I have something that I can scan, I then look actually at the comments. And I like to find things that have little to no comments. My rationale being, if there's a lot of comments, it's potentially that there's a lot of back and forth. People aren't quite sure how to proceed. It's not too straightforward. Or on the flip side, people are already working on it, and that's not going to be a good use of my time. However, the issue that I would actually click on is the middle one, which, if you can see, has the most comments by far. And the reason for that is that it has this meta issue tag. So I mentioned doing the sprint with scikit-learn. For sprints, they like picking these meta issues, and they do this also outside of sprints, where they basically describe a change that they want to make across the entire repository. They detail exactly what needs to be done. They provide tests, and they also list out each of the spots where it needs to change. So odds are you will never be the first one to arrive at one of these issues, meaning that you have examples where people have gotten PRs reviewed and merged that you can consult in that history, and you also have detailed instructions of how to go about making that change. That's a very good entry point into contributing to that repository. So, some labels you might want to look for: beginner, easy, good first issue. I wouldn't limit yourself to those. So I mentioned before about contributing pre-commit setups to other repositories. So one in particular called Yellowbrick, which is visualization of machine learning models. They wanted to set that up, and they had actually tagged it as expert, simply because that was outside the domain of their maintainers' knowledge. So no one in that group knew how to do that. So that was expert, that was beyond their levels. So that's all going to be very subjective. So do your research more on the labels, or look for particular technologies you're interested in, or certain things that maybe you learned a lot about GitHub Actions that do a certain thing. Maybe see if they want that, right? Look for that in the issues. And also don't disregard old issues. So most people, when you're using a search engine, the same thing when you're searching through the issues, people might stay on the first page, right? So if you go towards later results, you might find things that aren't as active. That Yellowbrick thing I mentioned, that was an issue that was open for 4 years before I found it. So I asked, are you still interested in this? And they were very much still interested in it. It's just that they hadn't gotten the time, they hadn't found someone with that knowledge. And so I was able to make that happen for them. I had a similar case with Seaborn, where the creator of Seaborn had wanted to add a reference line functionality to joint plots and facet grids. And immediately when I saw this, I was, it's just a for loop over each of the plots, and you add the line that they want. Very simple, because I understand matplotlib. I had never contributed to Seaborn, but I knew the underlying tech stack. And that was, I think, 9 months old at the time. So I asked, is this still of interest? And it was, and that led to something that was probably a pivotal moment in my open source contribution, because when that feature came out, this guy on Twitter announced that he was very excited about this and said, thanks so much to the creator of the library. And that creator retweeted that and said, no, thanks, Stefanie. So I was like, wow, I feel very seen, you know? So don't disregard those things at the end, but just make sure that those are still of interest. I discussed the meta issues, right? If you see anything like that, it might be called something else in a different repository, that's a great spot to get started. And then when you do find something that's interesting to you, make sure you comment on it to let people know that you want to work on that. This is not going to guarantee that someone won't just do your work and then beat you to it and put the PR in before you can do it. That's still going to happen. But what's good about this is you've announced your intent, and also if you need support from the maintainers, they already have seen your name that you're working on that, and it's a good spot to say, hey, I want to work on this, I'm getting stuck with this particular piece, how should I proceed? And I have more tips on how to go about this step on this article on my website. The slides are on my website, so you can check this out later. So that brings us to the fourth strategy, which is to identify and fix a bug. So we've all come across bugs. As you become more of a heavy user of a project, you will bump into them. So in my case, I had been using pandas, and I wanted to make a horizontal bar plot, just like a quick plot. And I noticed that when I specified the x-axis label, it was ending up on the y-axis. And the y-axis label was just completely disappearing whenever I passed it in. So this was obviously a bug. And the thing is I had bumped into this bug on 2 separate pandas versions across months. And I think it was actually New Year's when I realized, I'm like, how is this not fixed yet, right? So this was probably something that was not very often used in the library. And so I checked, I'm like, has this maybe never been reported? Has nobody ever bumped into this? And indeed, there were no reports for this particular issue. And so I put in the bug report. I confirmed that it was in main, it was in the latest version, it was indeed still there. So I went about and filled out this form. So if you're going to go about this strategy, again, check that the bug has not been reported or fixed. Check that it's still in the main branch. Check open and close. It's possible that it actually wasn't a bug. It's a feature. You never know. Make sure that your bug report is detailed and reproducible. This is for multiple reasons. One, the maintainers will have all they need to quickly decide, to triage this, is to decide, is this actually a bug? Is this the user's not using it correctly? Is it meant to be like this? And then on the flip side, if you actually are going to go about fixing this, you already have your test case written right there, and you have that, so that will speed up things. When you put in your bug report, you can right there volunteer to triage this. So I mentioned that this was probably not a very often used part of Pandas, so that meant that they could have agreed that it was a bug, but if it's not really used that much, it may not be prioritized for a fix for a long time. But I'm a user of it, I want it fixed, right? So I can volunteer, say I'm willing to work on this, and you already now have a way to control the prioritization of that. And you can even do this if you don't know how to fix it. So you can actually say, I'm interested in working on this, but I'm not sure where to start or how to go about this. You can ask for that advice right on the issue. And that brings us to the final strategy, which is to propose and implement a new feature. So this now you need to be even more of a heavy user of the project. What have you bumped into often that it's not quite giving you what you want? For me, once I left that first sprint, where I learned about NumPy and pre-commit, I began wondering, why was there a need for this test file to test all the things were across the entire repo every time? Why wasn't this just testing what I was trying to commit? And so I was like, there should be a pre-commit hook for NumPy. And I looked, and there was nothing. And I ended up building my own and using this internally at work. And at one point, I wanted to use this for a personal project, so I went about all the approvals to open source this. I approached the NumPy team. They were interested, and I started working on it. And then the joke was on me, because I realized at that point that what I had built would never work outside of my environment. So I ended up having to rebuild the entire thing. But it did get merged, and that did lead to me becoming a core developer. And now, if you see a lot of the issues coming in, almost all of them are people actually using this tool. So it has become like the main way of interacting with NumPy. So just like with the bug report, if you're going to go about it this way, make sure that your feature hasn't already been requested. And this is tricky because you might call it one thing and someone else will call it another thing. So best effort on this. And check open and closed, because it's possible that it's not there because they've decided not to do that. So just with the bug report, you want this to be detailed. You want to give the maintainers enough information to decide if they want to include that in the project or not. You can also volunteer to work on it. Again, you're vested in it. This is something that's going to make your life easier, so you probably want to move the needle on that and get that done sooner. And also remember not to take things personally. It's possible that your idea is really great, but it just doesn't fit with the project, or it's just going to be a lot for them to maintain, a lot of extra dependencies, and they don't want to go down that route. You always have the opportunity of forking, but again, everything in here is public, so you want to make sure that you're being respectful of everyone. So those were the 5 strategies, and they were presented in the order of the level of experience you'll likely have with that project. But I just want to emphasize that no contribution is too small, and none of those strategies is the best strategy, right? You use whatever feels right for the project. So when it comes time to actually making your contribution, so you've selected what you want to work on, so some tips for making that a successful experience. Again, comment on it, let people know what you're working on it, so that you have that visibility. If the project provides setup instructions, follow them. Make sure your environment is set up how they want it to be for development. I've had multiple cases where those instructions have become out of sync with the actual way they wanted you to set it up, and now you just have your first PR right there, right? Easily you can have that done. If you're new to development, so new to GitHub, start with things like documentation. Then you don't have to worry about building a lot of underlying code and compiling things. You can just worry about the basics of how do I pull things down, how do I work with them, and how do I push things up. So Git and GitHub. Again, if you are around on Monday, consider attending the sprint. And again, be patient and polite in all of your interactions. A lot of these people, a lot of maintainers are doing this on personal time outside of work. It may take time to get responses. Once you get that first PR merged, Keep up the momentum. Look out for opportunities to share knowledge across projects. So I mentioned learning about pre-commit from scikit-learn and then bringing it to another library like Yellowbrick. There's going to be a lot of opportunities of that. Poke around the code base, see how they do things, how do they set up actions. There's tons of things that you can cross-pollinate. Help other people contribute. So I mentioned those meta issues from scikit-learn, having a lot of PRs that you can consult. Once you have your first one, you might know why the CI is failing for that person who just put their first one in, right? You can respond telling them how to fix it, or you can comment on the things that you've already been told that you need to fix on previous ones. Pay it forward. This type of thing will not go unnoticed. I've had maintainers come up to me at conferences that they recognized me from some GitHub contributions I made. Had this happen with Matplotlib and Pandas at EuroSciPy in 2023. And if you stick with the project, if you keep your level of involvement there, you might end up being invited to become a core developer, which is what happened with me with NumPyDoc. So I hope I inspired you to begin your open source journey. I'd love to hear how it goes. On the left, you can find a QR code to let me know what you thought of this talk and have the slides. And on the right are all ways that you can follow my work and connect with me. Thank you.